The sound of a dropped fork was nothing compared to the gasp that filled the ballroom. Eleanor Vance, draped in jewels and ambition, had just seized Chloe, the reserved maid, and ripped her uniform right there in front of 30 of the city's finest. For a moment, the grand crystal chandelier above seemed to stop shimmering. Chloe stood frozen, her hands shaking, her dignity torn with the fabric. And then Samuel Vance rose from his seat, his eyes filled with a cold fire. Chloe was 26, a young black woman with a gentle spirit and capable hands that had learned to work hard since her youth. She lived quietly, never drawing attention to herself. But inside the Vance estate, a sprawling Newport mansion built in the Gilded Age, her presence was felt. She dusted, served, and kept her gaze lowered. But her poise, the very essence of her being, did not go unnoticed. Especially not by Samuel Vance. Samuel, the industrialist heir in his early 30s, had admired her from the moment she began her service in the summer of 1923. It wasn't just her elegance, though her dark eyes held a profound depth. It was her resilience, the way she endured cutting remarks without crumbling, the way she treated everyone, from the groundskeeper to the head butler, with the same quiet decency. But admiration is perilous when eyes are always watching, and the sharpest eyes of all belonged to Eleanor Vance, Samuel's mother. Eleanor was a woman who commanded power with every rustle of her silk gown. She had built her life on pedigree, fortune, and appearances. To her, the staff were not people with histories. They were simply components. And Chloe, no matter how deferential, began to irritate her. It started small. "Don't let your heels click so loudly on the marble," Eleanor snapped one morning, though Chloe's steps had been whisper soft. Another time, when Samuel complimented a floral arrangement, Eleanor interjected, "It was the horticulturalist's design, not the maid's." Chloe always bowed her head, answering softly, "Yes, Mrs. Vance." But Eleanor noticed how Samuel's gaze lingered on Chloe, how his voice softened when he spoke to her. And that, to Eleanor, was dangerous. One afternoon, Eleanor's close friend Isabella Sterling came for tea. As Chloe served petit fours on the veranda, Isabella's eyes narrowed. "She's rather lovely for a maid," Isabella whispered. Eleanor's face hardened. "Lovely?" She gave a short laugh. "She's a common girl, and she will never be more than hired help in this estate." Chloe heard the words, though she feigned ignorance. She placed the cream pitcher down gently, as if nothing had pierced her heart. But Samuel saw more than anyone realized. One evening, he stopped Chloe in the West Wing corridor. "You don't have to absorb her words," he said softly. Chloe looked up at him, steady as always. "It's my position, sir. Words cannot alter that." But Samuel's jaw tightened. "One day I'll show you that you're worth far more than how she treats you." Chloe lowered her gaze quickly, aware that someone could overhear. Yet deep inside, a tiny ember glowed, something she would never dare acknowledge. The estate soon buzzed with preparations for an upcoming gala. Eleanor planned it with the precision of a general. The guest list included powerful families, business tycoons, and high society's most influential figures. Every piece of silver was polished, every imported orchid placed perfectly. To Eleanor, the evening was more than a party. It was a demonstration of her authority. But to Chloe, it was an ordeal. Maya, the other maid, whispered as they laid out the crystal. "She's planning something. Be careful." Chloe only replied, "We will do our work, that is all." Still, a storm was brewing. Eleanor had watched Samuel watch Chloe too many times. She needed to make a statement. Loud, cruel, unforgettable. The night before the gala, Eleanor summoned Chloe to the sitting room. The older woman's voice was calm, but her words cut deeper than any shout. You may fool others with your quiet ways, but listen carefully. This is not your home. You are not family, and you will never, ever think of my son as anything more than your employer. Do you understand?" Chloe bowed her head. "Yes, Mrs. Vance." "Good," Eleanor said, her eyes cold, "because if you forget, I will remind you in front of everyone." Chloe left the room with her heart heavy, but her steps steady. She told herself it was only work, only another storm to endure. But storms, no matter how quiet, always break. And on the night of the gala, under the glitter of chandeliers and in front of Newport's most powerful families, Eleanor Vance would make her cruel move, one that would leave the entire estate speechless. The night of the gala arrived with the weight of expectation. The Vance estate glowed with golden light, every chandelier blazing, every silver tray shining like a mirror. Outside, Rolls-Royces lined the long driveway. Inside, the soft scuff of servants' shoes mixed with the sound of a string quartet warming up in the grand hall. Chloe moved silently through it all, her uniform immaculate, her face serene. She carried trays of champagne, double-checking every detail. On the surface, she looked steady, but deep inside, her heart pounded. Eleanor's words from the night before still echoed in her ears. "If you forget, I will remind you in front of everyone." Maya brushed past her with a platter of hors d'oeuvres. "Steady hands, Chloe. We just have to survive tonight." Chloe gave a soft nod. "We will." The guests began to arrive. Wealthy men in crisp tuxedos shook Samuel's hand and clapped his shoulder. Women in shimmering gowns swept into the hall, their laughter bright and sharp. Isabella Sterling was among the first, draped in diamonds, her smile wide but her eyes shrewd. She kissed Eleanor's cheek and whispered something that made both women smirk. Chloe stood near the entrance with a tray of filled glasses. Samuel caught her eye as he guided a couple inside. He gave her the smallest nod, a silent reassurance. Chloe lowered her gaze quickly, remembering her place, but the warmth of his look carried her for the next hour. Dinner was announced, and everyone filed into the massive ballroom. The long table sparkled under the chandelier. White orchids filled tall vases, their scent exotic in the air. Guests took their seats, servants moved swiftly, and Eleanor Vance sat at the head of the table, regal and composed. Chloe's duty was to serve the west side, near Isabella Sterling and two other society dames. As she poured wine, one of the women leaned close to whisper, but not quietly enough. "Such a pretty girl to be only a maid," she said. Isabella smirked. "Pretty things in uniforms can be dangerous." Eleanor's lips curved into a cold smile. She heard, and she did not correct them. Instead, her eyes cut across the table to Samuel. He was watching Chloe again. The first courses went smoothly. Chloe carried trays, Maya passed rolls, and Mr. Finch, the butler, directed the rhythm like an orchestra conductor. But the tension grew heavier with each passing glance. Eleanor noticed how Samuel thanked Chloe every time she poured near him. She noticed how his eyes softened whenever she bowed slightly, how his jaw tightened whenever someone spoke condescendingly to the staff. By the second course, Eleanor's patience had vanished. She leaned toward Isabella. "Watch this," she whispered. Isabella raised her brows but said nothing. It happened in the middle of the main course. Chloe stepped forward to serve a dish near Eleanor. Her hands were steady, her steps measured. But Eleanor's voice sliced the air. "Stop!" The room hushed. Every guest turned. "Bring her closer," Eleanor said to no one in particular. Chloe froze, uncertain, then moved nearer to Eleanor's chair. The older woman's eyes were sharp as ice. 2 years in my estate, and you cannot walk properly with a tray. Look at the way you carry yourself, as if you belong here." Chloe's heart raced, but she whispered, I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance. Eleanor's hand shot out, gripping Chloe's arm. Gasps rippled through the table. You think because my son is polite to you that you are more than what you are. You are nothing but help. Before Chloe could react, Eleanor yanked hard at the front of her uniform. Fabric tore, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the silence. Chloe staggered back, clutching herself. The tray nearly slipped. The entire room froze. Forks suspended, mouths open, gasps and murmurs filled the air. Isabella Sterling's hand flew to her diamonds. "Eleanor," she whispered, half shocked, half intrigued. Chloe's face burned. Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back. Her chest rose and fell with the force of her breath. All she wanted was to disappear, to sink through the marble floor. And then Samuel's chair scraped loudly against the stone. He rose slowly, every eye turning to him. His face was calm, but his eyes blazed with fury. He took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it gently over Chloe's shoulders, shielding her torn uniform. His hand lingered protectively, steadying her trembling arms. "Mother?" Samuel said, his voice low but filled with steel. That was enough. The silence deepened. Eleanor's lips parted in disbelief. "You humiliated her in front of everyone," Samuel continued. "Not because she failed her duties, but because you resent her presence. You went too far." "Samuel," Eleanor tried to cut in, but he raised a hand. "No, tonight you've shown everyone in this room that cruelty, not class, rules your table, but not mine." Gasps spread across the guests. Some nodded faintly. Others looked down, ashamed. Chloe stood frozen, tears finally breaking free. But Samuel's jacket shielded her. His words rang in her ears like a promise. Eleanor's face turned pale, her pride wounded deeper than she could conceal. "You would defend her over your own family," she hissed. Samuel's reply was simple. "I am defending what is right. That is what family should stand for." The table fell utterly silent. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to speak or eat. Isabella Sterling cleared her throat, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "Well, what a passionate household. Perhaps we should enjoy dessert." But no one moved. The gala had turned into something else entirely. A reckoning. Chloe lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, sir." Samuel glanced down at her and said firmly, "You don't need to thank me for being treated as a human being." The words struck deeper than any insult Eleanor had thrown. Chloe's tears flowed freely now, not of shame, but of release. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Guests excused themselves early. Conversations were hushed, footsteps awkward. The chandelier still glittered, the orchids still perfumed the air, but the mansion no longer felt magnificent. In the servants' corridor later, Maya squeezed Chloe's hand. "You stood tall," she said softly. Chloe shook her head. "I only stood because he did." But in her heart, she knew something had shifted forever. Samuel had seen her pain, and he had chosen to stand against his own mother for her. And while the estate lay in silence, Eleanor Vance sat alone in the ballroom, her diamonds still shining, her pride cracked. She had tried to tear Chloe down in front of everyone. Instead, she had exposed the strength of her son's heart. And the whole estate, every guest, every servant, was left speechless. The Vance estate had never felt so heavy. The night after the gala, silence spread across every hallway like a fog. Even the staff, usually bustling with gossip and jests in the servants' quarters, spoke in hushed tones. Everyone had witnessed the moment Eleanor Vance ripped Chloe's uniform. Everyone had seen Samuel defend her. It was the kind of scene that could not be scrubbed from memory. Chloe sat alone in the small staff sitting room, her head bowed, her fingers tracing the edge of Samuel's jacket still draped around her shoulders. She hadn't yet returned it. The fabric smelled faintly of sandalwood. And though she tried not to let her mind wander, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he stood for her. No one had ever done that before. Maya slipped in quietly and shut the door. "You're still up," she said. Chloe looked up with tired eyes. "Couldn't sleep." Maya sat beside her. "You know what you showed last night? That you are stronger than all of us put together. She wanted to break you in front of them, but you didn't let her see you fall." Chloe shook her head. "I almost did. If Samuel hadn't." "He did, yes. But you held your ground, Chloe. That strength was yours." Chloe didn't answer. She wasn't sure if strength was what she felt. What she remembered most was the sting of fabric tearing, the eyes of the guests, the searing heat of humiliation. The next morning, Samuel entered the kitchen where Chloe was preparing trays. She froze when she saw him. He didn't wait for formalities. He walked up to her, his voice gentle but firm. "Chloe, I'm sorry for what happened." "You don't need to apologize, sir," she whispered. "It wasn't you. But it was my home, my family." His eyes softened. "It should have been safe for you here." Chloe lowered her gaze. "I only came to work. Safety was never promised." Samuel reached for the tray she was holding and set it aside. "I won't let her treat you like that again, not while I'm here." Chloe's heart pounded. "Sir, please, if you continue, she'll only get angrier. She already thinks that." "That I care for you," Samuel finished. He didn't flinch. "She's right." Chloe's eyes widened, but Samuel pressed on. "I admire you, Chloe, not because of your beauty, though it's undeniable. I admire your resilience, your dignity, the way you rise above insult without bitterness. That's rare in this world." Chloe felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of his place and hers, but the words would not come. Instead, she whispered, "People will talk." "Let them," Samuel said simply. And then, as if fate wanted to remind them of the peril, Eleanor's voice sliced through the air. "Samuel!" They both turned. Eleanor stood at the kitchen door, her face pale but her eyes blazing. "Come with me, now!" In the grand library, Eleanor faced her son with fury. "Have you lost your mind? You embarrassed this family in front of Newport's most powerful people. You defended a servant over your own mother." Samuel stood tall. "I defended a woman who was wronged. You crossed a line." "She is nothing, Samuel. Nothing but the help." Samuel's voice hardened. "She is not nothing. She has more grace in her silence than many of the people we host at our table." Her hand trembled with anger. "You would throw away our name, our standing for her?" "I would throw away nothing," Samuel said firmly, "because love, respect, and kindness don't detract from a name. They give it worth." The words landed like stones. Eleanor's breath caught. She had never expected her son, always polite and dutiful, to stand against her so directly. Word of the gala spread quickly. By noon, whispers carried through the city of how Eleanor Vance had humiliated her maid, and how Samuel had defended her. Some guests told the story with shock, others with admiration. The young Vance has a noble heart, perhaps too noble. In the estate, staff looked at Chloe differently. No longer just a maid, she had become a symbol of quiet strength, of hidden worth. Another servant, once sharp with her, now brought her coffee with trembling hands. Even Mr. Finch, the old butler, gave her a nod of respect, as if to say, "You have earned your place." But Chloe herself did not feel triumphant. She felt exposed, caught in a storm she had never sought. That night she prayed quietly in her small room. "Lord, I never asked for this. I only wanted to work. If there is a way through this, guide me." A week later, Eleanor called for Chloe. The older woman sat by the fireplace, her jewels absent, her face lined with weariness. For the first time, her voice carried no sharpness. "Sit," she said. Chloe hesitated. "I'll stand, ma'am." She studied her. "You think I hate you." Chloe said nothing. Eleanor sighed. "Perhaps I do. Not because of who you are, but because of what you remind me of. I built this life on rules, control, and social standing. Then you walked in with your silence, your composure, and without trying, you shook everything. I never meant to cause trouble, Mrs. Vance." "I know." Eleanor's voice cracked. "But Samuel sees something in you that I cannot change. And last week, when he stood against me for the first time, I felt powerless." Chloe's hands trembled, but she steadied them. "I don't want power, ma'am. I only want peace." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "And perhaps that is why he loves you." She looked away quickly, ashamed of the tears. "Go. Continue your work." That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the mansion gold, Samuel found Chloe by the garden steps. She wore her plain uniform, but his jacket still hung in her locker inside. He looked at her with the same steady gaze he had held at the gala. "My mother may never accept us fully, but I don't care. Chloe, I want you to know I won't let fear silence what I feel." Chloe swallowed hard. "And what is it you feel, sir?" Samuel smiled softly. "That I love you, and that I always will." Chloe's breath caught, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She had no words, but the silence between them spoke louder than any. The Vance estate remained grand. The chandeliers still glittered. The guests still came and went. But something had changed forever. The night Eleanor tried to tear a maid apart had become the night her son revealed the true measure of wealth. Not in money, not in jewels, but in courage and love. And though the world whispered about them, inside those walls the truth was clear. Dignity cannot be stolen, and love cannot be silent.